This podcast is brought to you by ProLongevity, the award-winning 8-week program that can transform the lives of people with prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, and many other lifestyle-related illnesses. Founded by Graham Phillips, the pharmacist who gave up drugs.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the ProLongevity Podcast. And I'm delighted to have with me today Dr Jen Unwin, who I first got to know, like many of my best pals and contacts, through public health collaboration. And Jen has increasingly highlighted concerns around food addiction and recently written a book called Fork in the Road. So that's the major focus of our discussion today. Jen's new book, all about it and all about food addiction. Welcome, Jen.
Hi, Graham. Yeah, great to be here.
Perhaps you'd say a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, of course.
I think it's important that people know a little bit about your background. You're a doctor, but you're not a medical doctor, which is not... I don't want to say that in any pejorative sense, because actually a medical doctor is actually a courtesy title. It doesn't mean very much. And everybody else who's a doctor has had to do a PhD to get there. So I think we should make that clear.
Yeah, proper doctor. Although there's a bit of a twist. So so I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and I worked for well over 30 years in the NHS, helping people with actually chronic physical health problems. It's a bit of an unusual field. Most clinical psychologists obviously work in mental health or people with learning disabilities or older people. So I worked in general hospitals and primary care, helping people with chronic physical health problems to have the best quality of life they could, because we know that there's an overlap with things like chronic pain, with diabetes, with lung diseases, and mental health problems. Because it's depressing to be in chronic pain. So, so that was my role in the NHS, and when I qualified as a clinical psychologist, it was with a master's. That was how you did it back in the day, and then reasonably soon after I qualified, that changed and it became a professional doctorate. So people did 3 years practical training, but also had to do a piece of research. So I went off and did my piece of research at Hull University, so I could sort of get upgraded to a doctorate. So it's a professional doctorate. So it's not quite like a PhD. It's not a medical doctor nor a PhD, because that's 3 years pure research. The clinical psychology doctorate is it's case reports, a practical work, and a piece of research. But it's not quite the massive thing that a PhD can be. So yeah, it's interesting when it comes to psychologists and psychiatrists, and people often get confused about that.
And what was the subject of that research at the time?
Right. So, yes, fortunately, I got to do something I was super interested in. So I'd been working in a big hospital, and I'd noticed that as psychologists and health professionals, obviously we want to focus on the people who are struggling or not doing so well or have worse symptoms, and all our sort of focus gets paid to them. But I did notice that in a large hospital where thousands of people were coming through, many of whom who'd had extremely traumatic or life-changing experiences or diagnoses, actually the vast majority of people do incredibly well with those kinds of challenges. And so that really struck me, and I wanted to I got interested in a field called positive psychology, which is really about human flourishing and how we can help people to kind of achieve their best and get the best well-being and quality of life and so on. And it occurred to me to look at what are the characteristics of people who are doing well with these challenges, so that perhaps we can learn something of how to help those who struggle, rather than focusing on all the people with difficulties and what is it that defines them. So it's a kind of a slight sort of flip philosophically, if you like. So pulling on the positive psychology side, I was very interested in the role of a concept which is hope, and how you might define that, and how what difference it makes to people, and then obviously how you might intervene to help people to be more hopeful, if indeed it turned out to be a useful concept. But I kind of already knew it would be, because I'd looked at a lot of research, particularly by a chap called Snyder Snyder in the States, who wrote some amazing papers on this idea, and particularly in healthcare, but in all kinds of fields really. So I looked at people who'd were going to have a lower limb amputation. So it was a kind of in a way a standard traumatic thing. So they all had the same experience, if you like, in that way, and assessed people beforehand and followed them through to see who had adjusted well, who had good quality of life, good mobility, good mental health, 6 months down the line. So it was a prospective study, and one of the things that I measured was hope, but we measured loads of other things as well. But the thing that was the best predictor, not gender, not age, not how much of your leg you had amputated, not the kind of reason you had it amputated, but how hopeful you were at the beginning that you could sort of get on with your life in a meaningful way despite having this experience, seemed to be the best predictor. So then, of course, then that's been the rest of my career, really super interested in hope and how to engender that in other people. And it just fits so well with the work that we're all doing around lifestyle, because people who are more hopeful do look after themselves better. They're more likely to engage and change the behavior for the hope of a better future, and more able to do that. So I think if we can, while we're trying to help people with lifestyle interventions, if we can use some techniques which enhance their hopefulness of being able to to set some goals, to meet their goals, to notice what's working and to get to a better place, well, that's just the icing on the cake in a way. And we all know, don't we, that, I mean, you'll know yourself, having worked all these years sort of public facing, that just giving people information isn't sufficient for behavior change. Very occasionally, yes, people will take that information and run with it. On the whole, we give loads of advice and information, and I mean, if information worked, nobody would smoke, because it's on the side of the packet. Yeah. Don't smoke, you're going to lose your leg or die of cancer, and still people do. So we need to be a little bit more.
It's so right, because all of us as health professionals, and I think pharmacy particularly, because the pharmacy training has a much greater percentage of the science and a smaller aspect of clinical, although that's improved since I qualified. My younger colleagues are much better clinicians, I think. Well, I know all this stuff. If I just get this stuff into their head, that's it. Why doesn't it?
Like a black box, I'll just give
what I've got to do is download it. They'll know what I know, and then it'll all be fine.
Exactly, because we don't understand what their motivation is, what their goals are. I mean, it does occasionally work if things align. If you just give that information at the right time in somebody's life when they're just ready to hear it and willing to follow it. I'm not saying that information is pointless, because obviously what a lot of David and I do is we combine the two. So we give the information about physiology and insulin, and but then we're dovetailing it with the sort of motivational stuff to just to to give people the best chance really of being able to sort of make those changes. And again, it's none of it's magic. We can do the best evidence-based psychology things in the world, and still some people really struggle. So it's this kind of double thing then about, you said, tell everybody about yourself, or that's the sort of academic clinical side of it. And then there's the personal side, which is that I absolutely identify as a food addict myself, and I had yo-yo dieted all my life, even after I found low carb, and that made a massive difference to me.
Which segues nicely into my next question, which was this hope that you do. It appears in the book. It's a hopeful guide. So that kind of original research has played right up to today. You mentioned David, who is one of my heroes and one of my inspirations. And the two of you are just like put the two of you in a liquidizer, you've got perfection. For those who don't know, David he tweets as at low carb GP, and that's what he is. Tell us then a little bit your own health journey, because I'm well aware that you've kind of shrunken and exploded over time, as so many of us. So, what was your journey like? Because you've obviously in a good place now, but it didn't happen overnight, and you had your own traumas and all of that along the way.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, still now have to sort of pay attention to everything. There's no point as a food addict where you kind of relax your guard, because you're going to be right, well, not right back where you started, but really struggling, very quickly. So I think I'm pretty typical actually of a lot of people with this problem. So as a very young child, my earliest memories are of sweet and carbohydrate foods and how I could get my hands on them. So I think a lot of us are kind of born like this, and there's some evidence of that. There is quite a bit of evidence of quite a big genetic effect in this sort of genetic leaning towards addiction, any kind of addiction. Oftentimes when I interview people, we find that they have parents, grandparents, siblings with addiction problems. If it's not food, it's alcohol, drugs or nicotine. But there's this addiction propensity in the brain seems to sort of run in families. There seems to be perhaps something to do with how we respond, in terms of dopamine signaling, that we don't quite know yet, but something like that. So so earliest memories, and then putting on weight.
Were you a fat kid?
I was, and of course that was quite unusual back in the day. David and I were talking about this recently. In the 60s, there weren't many overweight kids, not like there are now.
I was a fat kid.
Were you as well?
Yeah. I mean, as you know, I'm Jewish, and there's this often repeated Jewish joke: they tried to kill us, they failed. Let's eat. Food is very, very central to absolutely any Jewish celebration. And I always, joke with my Muslim friends and colleagues that they fast for a month, right? We have one fast day a year, and my God, the fuss we make, we just can't do it. I mean, that's not quite true, but.
No, but it kind of is the point, because I think cultural factors are another incredibly powerful. And of course, now what's happened is that the whole culture's gone towards this problem, unfortunately, because of the availability of food and so on. I don't know about you, but I think that does actually affect you for the rest of your life. You have this sort of weird, I have a real problem with body image and sort of knowing how big I am. I just can't tell. If I'm thin, I still think I'm fat. If I'm overweight, I still think I'm, not. Anyway, it's very confusing. So fat kid. And then because I went to a girls' school, I discovered the delights of dieting. And also, I should say, my mother was definitely a food addict. She's not here anymore, but she would not have denied it. She definitely was. She taught me how to diet. There was some really crazy diets in the 70s and 80s, egg and grapefruit, all kinds of weird powders and business. So I'm sure that did my metabolism no favors, but I have successfully dieted, as you've said, all my life. I've kind of got overweight, then dieted successfully through sort of sheer grit, but then you can't live like that, so you kind of go bigger again. So that went on. And of course, as a psychologist, I was kind of ashamed of it, really, that I couldn't understand or control this one aspect. The rest of my life was like a dream, really, and my career and the family and everything, but really this one part of my life, it was just a mystery to me. And then we found low carb, and that, as I say, that really helped, because of course I now know that abstinence from sugars, flours and ultra processed foods is the way. But the problem is that with keto low carb, there are still lots of things which tickle the dopamine receptors that that we need to stay away from. And they're things like, I mean, this isn't everybody, so don't, if you're listening and you think this might be you, don't get scared. But dairy can be problematic, nuts, and definitely sweeteners. So a lot of keto, low carb, you know, all this low carb baking, or people tend to eat quite a lot of cheese and dairy because they're delicious and they're kind of allowed on low carb. So those can become problematic for us. So my weight I still wasn't definitely not in 100% control of my weight, really. So that I still went a bit up and down. And then I heard Bitten Johnson talking on the Diet Doctor website, which is an amazing website if people don't already know about it. And she's the sort of probably the internationally best qualified clinician in sugar. She calls it sugar addiction.
Yeah.
And I heard this term, sugar addiction, and I thought, oh my God, that's me. Everything sort of fell into place.
It was Bitten that was the final piece of the jigsaw for you.
Yeah, 100%. So when I retired, I took early retirement from the NHS at 55 and thought, right, I'm going to find out everything there is to find out. So Bitten does a fantastic training, which is holistic addiction medicine training. And so I did that, and that's how I met Heidi, that other people who know the PhD will know. Heidi Yaver, she's a nutritionist. We trained with Bitten at the same time and have since been working together in the UK, running a study which I can talk about, but also running weekends based on the same program in the Lake District. And we've got one coming up in November, actually, if anyone's interested. And the profits for that go to the PHC. And we run the groups for donations to the PHC. So everything I do now is to fund the good works of the PHC.
I was going to go on to PHC, but you've mentioned it several times. So, as you know, I've recently joined the board of trustees of the PHC. It's an organisation about which I'm passionate, and I was involved at an early stage. But you and David were very involved in the creation. So, just give us a quick 2 or 3 minutes on the PHC for those who don't know about it, because whenever I can plug it, I always do. And let me emphasise. I mean, you know, she's got a book to sell. Yeah. But you're not benefiting from the book. All of it's going to PHC.
Yeah. Yes. So the public health collaboration. So what happened was I found low carb. I'm telling David, I'm reading out of John Briffer's book, Escape the Diet Trap. And I'm reading to him, well, did you know there's more glucose in a slice of bread than there is in the same weight of sugar or whatever? And he's going, well, that can't be right. That's just wrong. You know, I can't believe that's right. So, and then he saw what a difference it made to me and how well I did. And of course, naturally, because I tend to do the cooking and everything, so naturally he's having to go a bit low carb as well, and he's starting to notice some benefits. Although I did it like cold turkey, he sort of slid into it, noticed benefits. At the same time, he was really burnt out, fed up with general practice, because everybody was getting fatter, sicker. You know, he was just adding medications and people weren't getting any better. So he was kind of thinking of finishing. And then we had a conversation, you know, well, how about, because we'd never actually worked together. And as you say, our skills are so complementary, really. We'd often talked about, you know, doing things and never actually done anything. So we said, well, why don't we, you know, wouldn't it be great to work together on a project at the practice, which would be about teaching. We thought we'll start with pre-diabetics because they're not at all scary in any way and they're not on medication. Yeah. And we teach them about low carb and we'll support them. We'll do a group because I always professionally work with groups. I'm a big fan of working in groups. I think they have a certain magic beyond the sort of one-to-one consultations. David was terrified at the idea of running a group, but I said, it's fine, I'll deal with all of that. You know, you deal with the weighing, the measuring, the HbA1cs and all of that. So we started that, and we were very naive and had no idea that we were doing something controversial. It made complete sense to us scientifically, so we thought it was fine. And people were horrified. The dietitian in the practice walked out, never came back, was never seen again. David spoke about the project at a couple of sort of diabetes professional events and got booed and his back turned on him. And we were utterly shocked by this by this reaction. but undaunted and undinted, because we were getting the most amazing results. And as people know, or they can Google, there's been several papers now from the project, which is sort of ongoing, and all the doctors in the practice now, all the practice nurses, they all understand and sort of practice in this way. So there's been, to date, the latest figure I heard, but it might be more, it's 117 drug-free remissions, and 20% of the whole diabetic register at Norwood, 9,000 patients is total, is in drug-free remission. So he's probably got the best results possibly in the world of the primary care. I mean, I know Virta have got some amazing results, but that's a sort of funded program. Well, we basically did it we didn't have a grant. We just did it in our own time in the evenings, and as I say, it's kind of ongoing. So that was the background. So at the point where we were very isolated and people were saying we were lunatics, we did know some other people in the space, like at the time, Rangan Chatterjee, obviously Asim was around. I'm trying to think who was there in the beginning. Joanne Reynolds and people like that, and obviously Sam. And Sam approached us, and he was looking to do something like this, and we said, well, definitely count us in. And the first conference in Birmingham all those years ago was, I think it's about 8 years ago now, was just such a lovely event, because it was the first time we'd been anywhere. Oh, Trudy Deakin was in right from the beginning, and she won't mind me saying, well, she actually cried after she gave her talk, because we were all clapping, and she said, I've never been anywhere where people have had such a lovely reception. We had the Fixing Dad people were there. It was really lovely. And it's the PhDs retain that same atmosphere, really, of people trying to kind of spread the information that this lifestyle is, it's the most incredible thing, really, in terms of a range of physical and mental health problems. So I've just got back from Keto Live in Switzerland, and they had a whole day on mental health and keto, and it's just amazing, some of the results. And again, it's not saying it's a panacea for everything, but there's been some incredible research going on. Actually, he'd be a good guy to interview. Iain Campbell up in Scotland. I don't know if you come across him.
I know Iain from years ago, so I must do that. Yeah.
He's doing this research on bipolar. And he has an amazing program called Bipolarcast. It just seemed like a good idea to set up a charity that was going to try and promote this kind of information and counter the low fat, high carb, general public health advice that, the more we looked into the science, the wronger it seemed to be. And of course, I knew from my own personal experience that that had been the wrong advice for me all my life. And that's why I wrote the book, really. I wrote it to be accessible. I read it and understand it at the age of 12 myself. I wanted something that, if that book had existed when I was that age, I wouldn't have had to go through all of that heartache and probably, harm to my physical health as well over the years. So so that was why I wrote the book, really, just to get the information out there to people.
And as you say, it's a hopeful guide, which kind of segues nicely into the opening.
And it's really cheap at the minute as well. So if people want to buy it, now is the time. Amazon do these things where they sort of reduce the price occasionally. And then the other thing to say, because I don't know if you've seen it, just out, hot off the press, is The Fork in the Road 100-Day Journey to Food Freedom Personal Progress Journal. And this has a double page spread for every day. It sort of links to Fork in the Road. So it's so you can journal for 100 days while you're, trying to make the changes that are described in the book. And we've had some really nice reactions about it so far. That's on Amazon as well now. The next project is to do a workbook that exercises you can work through that are based on the book, but also based on Heidi and I's work that this research we've been doing, and what seems to work in group settings. We're going to do a workbook so people can sort of work through it in their own time. So that's the next project.
And Amazon is the best place to go to get all of that?
Yes, I'm afraid it's the only place for people who hate Amazon, because it's just the easiest way to do it. You can self-publish. So the fantastic designer, Michael and Kiki at Creative Key, who are in America, we've put it up. So the PHC has a Kindle publishing account, because of course they did the Real Food Rocks cookbook back in the day, which is still available.
Yeah.
So we've published it through there. So you pay your money, the money comes to the PHC, and then but Amazon will send you the book. So it just means we don't have to bother with postage and faffing around. It's just the easiest way to do it, really. If you're
do what I do, attend the PHC conference and buy it direct from the author, and even get her to sign it for you.
Exactly. Or like this week, I don't know when this will go out, but this weekend we're at Kestival, and I'll take some down there. So wherever we go,
it's not a book in the sense that I've ever understood a book, and it's somewhere between a book and a pamphlet, and it's quite hard to convey it, because I've as you know, on the podcast, we've had lots of really leading thinkers, big brains, and they've written books. Just describe it, because I want people to get a sense of what it is, because it's not if you think about a book in its conventional sense, it's got its own different kind of layout, a different structure, a whole different nuance about it, which I think I've never seen anything quite like it. It makes it really interesting and really engaging.
Yeah, so I think, so as I say, the idea really was that it's definitely aimed at the general public, or who might sort of see it and think, yes, I've this is my problem, I need to know some stuff. So it's not, although I've kind of summarized the science as I understand it, I haven't, there's not great long lists of references or very detailed stuff, because like you, I've read a lot of books like that, but really I just wanted to cut to the chase and tell me what to do. Give me some ideas. So David explains the physiology of, he does this sort of like the introductory chapter with the physiology of insulin, and also we do describe in a sense, the sort of biochemistry as to, why is it that some of us behave in this way that's actually sort of harmful despite our best intentions? What is it in the brain that's going on? Because I think once people understand that, it helps them to not feel ashamed and self-blaming. They can just think, oh right, I get it now, my brain's been hijacked by processed food. Now I know what to do about it. It's not my fault. It's kind of that empowering thing. There's a chapter on, are you actually a food addict? Because obviously with the kind of food that's around these days, a lot of people do overeat, or they they eat things on occasion when they shouldn't, and they say, oh I'm addicted to chocolate, but they might, it is only maybe 10 to 15% of the population, although that's quite a lot. That's probably 5 million adults in the UK. But there's only a proportion of us who really have this problem where we really can't moderate. So David was probably bordering on type 2 when we started doing the research. He was probably a little bit overweight, and he can overindulge in stuff, but he can equally stop. So if we get back from a holiday and he's been going a little bit over the top with the drink and the desserts, we never do that now, but back in the day, he'd get back on Monday, he was straight back on it. Well, I would take me ages to try and get back. Once I was eating those foods, it took me ages to try and get out of it again. So I'm a proper rock bottom food addict, whereas he's more, Bitten Johnson called him a harmful user rather than a hardened food addict. So yes, there's that distinction. So in the book we go through the criteria. So an easy way to remember the 6 criteria from the WHO, basically substance use disorder, which is addiction. Of course, I mean, we should caveat that there isn't a recognized condition of food addiction yet. There's obviously alcohol addiction, drug addiction, addiction to other substances, and those are the criteria that we've taken. But I think you'll see when I describe them how perfectly they map on for some of us to the behavior that we have. So craved is the acronym that we're using now, Heidi and I. And C is for basically cravings and compulsion. So it's this idea that you have cravings and compulsions that are so strong that you can't resist them. So even though you say to yourself Monday morning, no biscuits today, you know, by tea time you're you're so craving, and you know, you can almost sort of watch your hand go to the biscuit barrel despite saying to yourself, I don't want to do that today, and then you've done it, kind of thing. So C is for compulsions and craving. R is reaching for more, which is, you know, not just reaching for one biscuit is never enough for us. We always end up eating more than we intended. You know, we'll say, oh, I'll open that packet and I'll just have 2. Well, it's never going to happen if you've got a food addiction problem. So reaching for more. A is activities neglected, and this is the effect where the more you get drawn into the sugars and the carbohydrates and the processed foods, the less you do of other things in your life. So you're tending to give up hobbies, tending to give up socializing, you know, withdrawing from people, just life getting more and more focused around the food. So that's A. V is for volume, and this is finding it really hard to just moderate the volume of anything. You know, one slice of cake never enough. You know, it's always having to be more. E is for exclusion, and this is to capture the idea of sort of withdrawal symptoms. So if you try and stop and give it up, you experience shakiness, headaches, gastrointestinal problems, grumpiness, anxiety, panic attacks, that kind of thing. Could be any of those. So and then D, which for me is the really defining one, is continued use despite knowledge of damage. D for damage. And this is where, you know, it's gone way past the point of you knowing you should do something different and trying to do something different, but being unable to stop, and knowing that it's harming your mental or physical health, which of course people with type 2 diabetes, you know, they often do. They know they shouldn't eat these things, but they, you know, find it really hard not to. Or, you know, in my own case, obviously knowing that I would put on weight and feel more depressed if I ate these things, but just in the moment, continuing to do that. So yeah, craved is the 6 criteria, and if you've got 3 or more, then that indicates a probable problem.
I don't want to get into the weeds of the physiology of addiction, but I think we should kind of say something about it. You've kind of covered it in the crave thing, but what is addiction?
So there's actually several mechanisms with food addiction, probably all interacting, but the main one in any addiction, we know is to do with dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter involved in motivation and kind of being driven to drive and motivation. So obviously we need it, and we needed it to survive, and we, you know, it's a major part of our survival mechanism. In the primitive brain, we are driven to do things which will preserve our lives and the continuation of the species. And we were driven, particularly in the autumn, to overeat foods that were sweet, or, you know, like nuts and things like that were calorific, so that we could put on weight and survive the autumn. And we know that those foods don't have the same, so one of the other mechanisms is we know those foods don't have the same off mechanism as things like meat and fat, so we can actually continue to eat them beyond, we don't get a sort of satiety signal. So I always see it that my ancestors were, that's why I'm here, you know, they were great survivors. They were the ones elbowing their way to the front of the queue, the nut tree, or the fruit tree or whatever, and we're able to sort of eat enough to survive the winter. There are other neurotransmitters involved. So another one is serotonin, which is the sort of happy, relaxed hormone.
Yeah.
And the process there is when we have something sugary, we know that our insulin goes up to deal with that sugar and, you know, get it out of the bloodstream. And an interesting thing happens when insulin is high. and that's that the precursor to serotonin, which is tryptophan, interestingly, get through the blood-brain barrier more easily. And so tryptophan goes into the brain and makes more serotonin. And that's the sort of the post-Christmas lunch, happy, sleepy feeling, and sort of plays into, you know, people when they say, I'm a stress eater, or, you know, if things are upsetting, I kind of eat to calm myself down. That probably plays into that mechanism. The difficulty is that these high levels of dopamine and serotonin, that the brain doesn't really like that. We like it because we feel great. The brain doesn't really like it. And like everything in the body, homeostasis, it tries to rebalance by knocking out a few receptors. So you will end up with fewer dopamine and serotonin receptors every time you do that. And of course, you'll see that that's not a great idea, because we all want motivation and we all want relaxation and happiness. So the trap is then that to get that dopamine and serotonin, people eat more, as I've already said. It's one of the symptoms. You then need 2 slices of cake, 3 slices of cake to get the same feeling, or to get rid of the withdrawal symptoms. And every time you do that, your brain is actually, so you're digging yourself a deeper hole. And we do know that high sugar diets are linked with depression and anxiety and other mental health problems. That's a really, you know, accepted finding, that high sugar diets are bad for your mental health. And that's why I think so. It is difficult to get out of it, but I think if people know this information, they've sort of got that explanation as to why they're feeling, you know, more and more depressed and hopeless. And there is this hope. There is hope of a way out. If you can, exactly like alcohol, you know, where the solution is abstinence. It's difficult because we have to eat, but we don't have to eat those things that really cause these sort of spikes of these neurotransmitters in the brain. So eating in an abstinent way for us, avoiding our own personal drug foods. They're nearly always sugar, grains, and ultra processed food. Sometimes, as I say, some other things. So over time, for me, cheese and nuts have become more problematic. So working out a food plan that, you know, works for us and doesn't lead to those sorts of cravings. You know, it's a good healthy food plan with all the things that you need for a healthy brain and body, but none of the things that are going to spark you off. I think it's very I think food addiction is probably the most difficult, because you can't avoid. You can avoid cigarettes, booze, drugs that we have to eat, and also sugar is the only psychoactive drug that we give kids. We don't give them alcohol, nicotine, and booze. Our brains are already, you know, they're already getting molded.
Yeah, and there's sort of epigenetic change. So if the uterus is a kind of high sugar uterus, you end up with a baby predisposed. And so they've shown this, certainly in rat studies, that each generation becomes more addicted. I mean, you could do that in human studies, but it might take 180 years. Whereas there's a debate about how much you can extrapolate between other mammalian studies, but the principle is well founded, I think.
There has been some research showing that for every adult that we have now with a food addiction problem, there's going to be 2 children growing up with that difficulty. I mean, even if there isn't epigenetics, there's the whole environment and cultural problem where we've sort of accepted that kids drink Coca-Cola and eat Frosties for breakfast, and then, you know, they might have a sandwich for lunch and a pizza for tea, and they've eaten carbs with their carbs, and you can't build a body and a brain unless you've got protein and the right fats. Our brains are made of fat mostly.
And as a community pharmacist, of course, I mean, I've been helping people quit smoking for at least 30 years. So I'm very familiar with smoking as an addiction. And we see plenty of people with alcohol addiction and the resultant medication. So I'm very familiar, if you like, and at particular stages in my professional life, I've worked extensively with addicts.
Yes.
But there's no such thing as food addiction, is there? Doesn't exist.
Exactly.
So let's just say a little bit about the classification of diseases and what we think is going on in all of that.
What's going on? Well, I mean, to be fair, There isn't a lot of research on food addiction. There is coming. There's hardly any on treatments, and that's why we're doing this study that we're doing. And there's sort of argument about whether you can prove that people get withdrawals from sugar. You know, should you call it sugar addiction? Should you call it food addiction? What is it? Ultra processed food addiction? What do you kind of call this beast? How do you classify it? So I suppose, to be fair, there probably is more science to be done. But also, so Heidi Yaver, who I've already mentioned, did coordinate us putting a bid to the WHO to get this category included in the ICD, and they came back with various reasons why it wouldn't be. But one of the key ones, which we thought was interesting, was it would be very difficult in terms of it would be a massive challenge to the food industry if we said that sugar to be addictive. I think we're 30 or 40 years behind the cigarettes, because it took a while till it was accepted that cigarettes were addictive.
Yeah.
And they fought it and fought it and fought it successfully for a long time. I think we've got quite the battle on our hands. I would really hope that it happens in my lifetime, and we're hoping to maybe have a conference next year in the States and involve a lot of the researchers and campaigners and clinicians, and try and get one of the main challenges will be to get everybody together and get some consensus, because that, you know, as I say, there are these disputes about whether, you know, we say sugar addiction because that's probably the key psychoactive substance. Is there enough evidence for that, rather than perhaps call it food addiction, because people say, well, you know, broccoli isn't addictive, which is probably true. So there's a lot of work to be done, and you know, I'm really glad that the PHC is sort of taking on the campaign, and last year we had this one-day conference linked to the PHC with people like Bitten and the amazing Paul Early speaking. So I would highly recommend, when the videos go up, if anybody's interested, definitely watch Bitten's and Paul Early's talks. You'll get a lot more detail on the mechanisms and so on.
Now, you've touched on this, but just in general terms, if you think you may be food addicted, what would the warnings? I mean, you can go through the crave mnemonic, but just sort of in a global sense, what does it look like?
I think, you know, if you're spending most of your day thinking about food, what you want to eat, what you should eat, what you shouldn't eat, if you're making multiple attempts to sort of try to, you know your diet's harming you, but you're making attempts to try and change it, and you know, maybe not doing so well, you know, particularly if you've got a condition like anxiety, depression, type 2 diabetes, maybe irritable bowel, any of these things that can be kind of worsened by diet, and you're not succeeding. I mean, those would all be hints to me. And you know, maybe like me, you know, putting on weight, losing weight, putting on weight, losing weight. I mean, a lot of people do that. They're not all food addicts, but you know, many of us are. Yeah.
And so, if you are one of those people, what should their first step be?
Well, actually, I mean, this sounds a bit pompous, but I would probably read the book just to see, you know, and to see if it resonates with you. And the difficulty, of course, is that because it's not a recognised condition, there aren't recognised clinics or you know, if you go to an eating disorders clinic, they more have the approach that learning to moderate what you eat and being able to sort of eat a bit of everything, and because that's never going to work for someone like me. If you go to an addiction clinic, they're used to working with alcohol, like you say, nicotine. They've never worked with people with food addiction, so they wouldn't quite know what to do. Or you might end up getting in the mental health system. So I'm not sure in that way. Now, there are quite a lot now of people who've sort of trained through Britain and other places who are setting up programs. So as I say, Heidi and I we've got a weekend coming up in November. If anyone's interested, get in touch. There's a great group in America that also trained at the same time as us, called Sugar X Global. Dave Wolf, Anna Fruling, and Judy Wolf, and they're great. There's great information that they give. There's a number of sort of free support groups as well. So if you're just trying to kind of do this on your own, I have a ClubHouse on a Wednesday night. So it's tonight, actually, because we're recording this on a Wednesday, 6 p.m. every Wednesday, called Fork in the Road. And Anna Fruling comes to that. And also Jane Steele, who also trained at the same time as me. And that's a sort of, sometimes we have speakers, sometimes we have just a bit of chat and get people to come up and join in. So there's ClubHouse there. There's some lists of other websites and resources also in the back of Fork in the Road there. Or you can go on, if you want some one-to-one help, if you go on Bitten Johnson's website, bittensaddiction.com, she's got a list of all the people that she's trained in all the countries and what they offer. So you can get properly assessed, or you can get involved in some treatment. But obviously, unfortunately, that most of those people will be charging a certain fee. Because it's not available. There's nothing much available on the NHS. We're hoping to train, some ambassadors at some point to incorporate some of this knowledge into their groups, so that we can sort of spread the word.
And as you know, one of my passions about community pharmacy is the public health role. And virtually every pharmacy in England now is an accredited healthy living pharmacy. We've shown that we can be very effective, certainly in smoking cessation and behaviour change. And an ambition of mine would be and these are not the pharmacists, they're generally the pharmacy team, so the front-facing staff. And if we could train 100 of those at a certain level, just imagine. So that's kind of, we're trying, we've got this pharmacy lecturer, we're trying to do interesting stuff there. So that's very much, on my list of things to try and see if we can pioneer some stuff. So we all know what the typical Western diet looks like, and you've described that. There are some recipes in the book, and without trying to go through them, just give us a sense of what the recipes look like in the book.
So what we advise people is to have a good amount of protein, basically, because you need that for this body and brain and for satiety. So base your meals on a nice piece of protein, and maybe a bit of added fat if what you've chosen, like your chicken, isn't very fatty, and then just some low carb vegetables alongside. So most of the recipes are sort of based on that. Some have got a little bit of dairy in, but we tried to sort of make them not too dairy and nutsy. People with food addiction should be careful with fasting. I've kind of went down this road, and it can kind of work for a while, but then it can sort of backfire on you. So most people, we recommend to start with 3 meals a day, and then if you're not hungry in the morning, obviously you can drop the breakfast and go down to 2 meals a day, but try not to have any snacking and avoid those foods that we've talked about. So we've got things like I make a chicken curry with ghee, so it's a nice sort of meaty, fatty curry, and you can have that with cauliflower rice. It's the old staple, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I remember that one. That's on my list.
Yeah, it's quite a meaty diet.
You've talked a bit about dieting in the past and your kind of yo-yoing diet. So what did your diet used to look like historically, and what does it kind of look like today?
Oh gosh, yes. Well, so it would have depended what phase I was in. So if I was in a sort of dieting phase, I'd be doing something like Weight Watchers or Slimming World or something like that, and sort of trying to stick to that. So it would be, I can remember I used to drive to work quite early because I had a bit of a drive. So I would take, and this I thought was good, a brown bread banana sandwich with a bit of cinnamon on. And I'd eat
healthy
it in the
whole
car.
grains and
Healthy
lots
whole
of
grain.
healthy potassium. What could possibly go wrong?
What could go wrong, apart from the fact that I was starving hungry about 10:30 in the morning. So then I'd have to sort of hang on and try wait till I ate my pitta, a whole wheat pitta with hummus and a bit of shredded carrot in at lunchtime. Again, thought it was healthy. You'll notice I haven't had hardly any, apart from the chickpeas in the pitta, I haven't had any protein so far. And then I'd get home in the evening and we make something for the kids. So it might be like a pasta bolognese bake would be an example. So I'd have a tiny bit of protein there, but pasta again. So that would be typical, and I would think I was doing all right there.
Yeah, healthy whole grains and fruit is spot on.
Lots of veg and so on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these days, I'm sort of proxy carnivore, if you like. So I might have trying to think what I had yesterday. Duck breasts. I might have a steak later. I have bacon and eggs. So I do like things like lamb shanks and things like that. So I mean, people might see that as very limited, but it's very delicious.
And so it's very heavily meat based. Is it exclusively meat, or do you add some green veg or anything like that?
Yeah, I go through phases. So I'm currently, because I've been away, so I've kind of slightly lost my complete focus. So I'm just having a bit of a carnivore week. So I'm just eating meat and fat this week. But yeah, I'd often would have roasted cauliflower or green beans or spinach or things like that. And David he quite likes a lot of veg, so I would often cook it for him anyway, even if I wasn't having it. Roasted Mediterranean vegetables with some lamb or something like that. Yeah.
Well, something's clearly going right, because I reckon I've known the two of you for about 5 years, and in the 5 years I've known you, I reckon you both look 10 years younger. So something's working out.
Nice. I think for sure, I've put a couple of pictures on Twitter of me like 36 and 56 and stuff like that. Yeah, I feel mentally and physically so much better than I did in my late 30s, and I'm now 58, and lots of things are better. I have no aches and pains. I sleep well. I've just got back from boot camp. I do a boot camp 3 or 4 times a week. I run twice a week with David. So it's definitely possible to exercise without carbohydrate, if anyone's wondering. There's a bit of an adaptation period, but when you're in it, you're fine.
I had Iain Lake on the podcast. We just released it this week, and he talked about the 0-5-100. So if anyone doubts that you can run 100 miles fasted over 5 days, and you'll be perfectly fine, do look at that podcast. Fantastic. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you feel we should cover?
I think I'm pretty sure we've covered we've talked about, what does it look like? What would you kind of do about it? It's one of those things that you have to keep working at it, really. And I think joining a community, I probably should have emphasized that slightly more. I think joining a community and having that support is really important. Some sort of a group, even if it's online. It's quite difficult to do this stuff alone, and you're often the only person in your family who has this kind of weirdness, so they don't always understand that you can't.
All our friends think we're mad, Karen and me. They think we're mad, but they kind of accept it now.
Exactly, they'll accept it. But yeah, it's nice to be in a group of people and not feel mad, feel like everybody's doing the same. That's what's quite nice about the ClubHouse on a Wednesday. We're all in the same boat. And
certainly from my perspective, I was a fat and hungry kid. I did all the AO diet. I was a fat and hungry adult, and I remember at the end of breakfast, I'd still feel hungrier. In fact, I'd feel hungrier at the end of breakfast than at the start.
Than when you started, Frosties, for example,
And it was toast and marmalade, and maybe some orange juice. And then, like 2 hours later, I'd be starving, and so I'd have a big lunch. And at the end of lunch, I'd be weirdly looking forward to supper.
Yeah.
So I spent my whole life. The fatter I got, the hungrier I got, and the hungrier I got, the fatter I got.
Yes.
The big change for me was the original 5-2 diet from Michael Mosley. That looking back on it, it was imperfect, but it got me thinking. And then I think bumping into you guys really started me on the low carb journey. What's interesting is everything that you've described in terms of the food addiction and the mental health actually plays identically well into cardiometabolic health. They're not separate. So if people follow your program, they won't just be better mentally, but they'll be better physically. They'll reduce their blood pressure, they'll reduce their waist, their mood will improve, their sleep will, just as you've described. And that's exactly mine finding. I'm in my early 60s now.
Yeah.
I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. And I'm fitter than I was in my 30s. And my ambition now, Karen's kids and my kids are starting to produce little sprogs, is to be able to do absolutely everything with my grandchildren that I used to do with my children, because that's a meaningful fitness. I mean, HbA1c, hypertension, all these metrics, they don't really mean very much in terms of your everyday life. But being fit and healthy, sleeping well, enjoying life, and getting the most out of it, those are something that I really, I can... Priceless, absolutely priceless. Yeah. So again, you've touched on this, but if people want to reach you, where's the best place?
So the place I most hang around is on Twitter at Jen_Unwin. But there is a website, forkintheroad.co.uk, and you can message through the website if you actually want to reach me direct. Or, I mean, that would be a good way if you're interested in the November weekend, Profits to the PHC. And it's an intensive weekend teaching you all this information. You get all the food and all your accommodations included, and it's in the beautiful Lake District. Yeah, if you're interested in that, maybe message through forkintheroad.co.uk and we'll get you some information.
Brilliant. What I can say is on my journey, there have been some people who have absolutely inspired me. And you and David, thank you so much. You are right up there. It's helped me on my personal health journey, and it's really helped us create the ProLongevity program, and all that you guys do, and all of it in your own time, at your own cost, for free, out of passion and commitment. That's very special in these days. So I think all of us owe you a huge debt of gratitude, and if we can support you in some small way, we absolutely should. I will link to everything you've discussed. And we'll put out some little snippets. And certainly, as we get closer to November, if it's helpful to put some more out, we'll do that. Because,
thank you.
Why wouldn't you?
And thank you, Graham. Thanks so much. I love to chat about it. And, hearing you say that is fuel to our fire. If we can help one person feel better, live that life that they want to live, that, we'll carry on as long as we can.
Fantastic.
If you enjoyed the podcast and want to find out more, join our Wellness and Pro-Longevity Facebook group. Don't forget to subscribe and follow so you never miss an episode, and maybe share to friends and family who might benefit. Finally, if you think you might need help with diabetes, heart disease, or any of the other diseases we discuss, then book a free consultation with Graham. There's absolutely no charge for this, and we would never put you under any pressure. What do you have to lose? Bye for now, and see you for the next episode.